The wind off Lake Michigan had teeth that January night. Real, vicious ones. I stepped out of the terminal at O'Hare at 10:15, dragging a suitcase stuffed with sample presentation boards from a week-long design conference in Seattle. My throat was raw. My head felt like someone had packed it with wet concrete. I'd been fighting this flu for 3 days straight and losing badly, and all I wanted was to get home, take 2 Advil, and sleep until Tuesday. What I didn't expect was to see Reed's silver Lexus already idling at the arrival's curb. My chest did that embarrassing flutter. We'd been married 4 years, and sometimes he still surprised me. I actually smiled walking toward the car. He must have pulled up my flight information and decided to come early. That was the Reed from year 1. The attentive one, the one who always had a water bottle ready in the cup holder because he knew I hated airports. The trunk didn't pop. The hazard lights didn't flash. The window rolled down maybe 3 inches. Reed? I moved closer, dragging my bag through a thin skin of slush. Hey, I didn't even text you. How did you know I landed? He was already on his phone, not looking at me. His voice came out flat, like he was declining a meeting invitation. I can't take you home. Something came up with the Kessler account. Patterson called an emergency. I have to be downtown in 20 minutes. I stood there in the blowing snow and tried to parse that. It's 10:30 at night. I know what time it is, Audrey. His eyes cut to me for exactly 1 second. Not irritation, calculation. Like he was managing a situation, not talking to his wife. There's a rideshare pickup lane on level 2. I'll Venmo you for the fare. That was when I noticed the scarf. It was draped over the headrest of the passenger seat. Ivory silk printed with tiny red flowers. Delicate. Deliberately feminine. I had never owned anything like it. I ran cold all winter and lived in chunky knits, and it certainly hadn't been there when I'd borrowed Reed's car 3 weeks earlier to take equipment to a client, because I'd set my coffee in that cup holder and remembered the seat being completely bare. Reed, whose scarf is that? He reached over with one smooth motion and shoved it into the glove box. Not startled, not guilty. Efficient, the way you'd swipe crumbs off a counter right before company arrived. It's my mother's, she left it last week. Audrey, I really have to go. The window went up. The Lexus pulled forward. The rear wheel caught a puddle of gray slush at the curb's edge and sent a sheet of freezing water directly into my coat. My good charcoal wool coat, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy. I watched the taillights disappear into the traffic loop and stood there on the curb, in the blowing snow, soaking wet, running what I estimated was 102-degree fever, with $43 in my wallet and a phone showing 3% battery. I made it back inside to a charging kiosk near baggage claim. My hands were shaking so badly it took 4 tries to seat the cable. A Chicago Department of Aviation employee behind the counter saw me struggling and waved me around to use the landline mounted on the wall. An actual corded phone, which I hadn't seen since probably 2007. I called Pam's number from memory. She answered on the second ring. I told her where I was. She said 2 words, "Don't move." I don't remember much after that, the floor of the terminal seeming very soft, and then nothing. Pam told me later that I was already slumped against the kiosk wall when she arrived. The paramedic said the flu had developed into pneumonia somewhere over the Rockies, and my body had simply stopped informing me about it. She got me to Northwestern Memorial, and I spent 4 days there, before she moved me to her apartment in Wicker Park to finish recovering. 10 days passed. I know because Pam kept a tally on the whiteboard she used for her meal prep schedule. Every morning she'd add 1 more hash mark, and then she'd hold up my phone and show me the call log without saying a word. 0 missed calls from Reed. Not 1 voicemail. Not a single text asking whether my flight had landed. Nothing. 10 days of silence while I was in a hospital bed, and then on Pam's couch with a pulse ox monitor clipped to my finger, and the man I had shared a home with for 4 years had not picked up his phone once. On the morning of day 11, I sat up on my own and asked for coffee instead of broth. Pam made the coffee and set my phone on the kitchen table in front of me without comment, and I looked at that empty screen for a long time. I thought about the silk scarf. I thought about how quickly his hand had moved it. Not flinching, not scrambling, just covering the situation the way someone covers a habit they've had. For a while, he'd rehearsed that gesture. I didn't call him. I wanted to see how long it would take. That same evening, Reed's Lexus pulled into our driveway in Elmhurst. I know because Cora texted me. She lived 4 blocks over and had been keeping eyes on things since I'd reached out from Pam's apartment. Something I'll explain. Reed walked in to find the house dark, the kitchen cold, and a thin layer of dust on the surfaces that builds up in 10 days when no one runs the Roomba. He called Mrs. Patton, our part-time housekeeper. His voice, Cora told me later, carried clearly through the side window. She happened to be standing near while returning a pair of pruning shears to our neighbor. He wasn't worried. He was annoyed. His exact question, which Mrs. Patton relayed to me by text that night, was, "Where is Audrey? Why hasn't she been in touch with you? Why does the house look like this?" Mrs. Patton told him she hadn't seen me since, before I left for Seattle, that she'd been calling to coordinate the cleaning schedule, and my phone went straight to voicemail each time. That she'd assumed Reed and I had traveled somewhere together for the holidays. Cora said she heard his voice change through the glass, that boardroom smoothness going thin and strange. He asked Mrs. Patton to say that again. She did. I should tell you about Cora. She was Reed's half-sister, his father's daughter from a relationship before he married Roberta. Reed's family had treated Cora's mother like an inconvenient footnote their entire lives, and when Reed's father died 3 years ago, Reed had managed the estate in a way that left Cora with next to nothing, despite what the will clearly specified. She'd fought it. The legal fees had nearly matched the settlement. She'd moved on, but she had cataloged everything. She messaged me on day 4 of my recovery. Said she'd been watching Reed for 2 years and believed I deserved to see what she'd found. We met at a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue. The first morning I was strong enough to take the L. She pushed a manila envelope across the table. Inside, 18 months of statements from a secondary business account Reed had opened in the name of a shell company I'd never heard of. Regular payments to a luxury building on North Michigan Avenue called the Ashton. Monthly amounts, consistent since before our last anniversary. A $4,100 charge at a jeweler in River North. A $2,600 charge at Nordstrom. Same week, I'd been stretching our household budget to cover a roof repair he'd said we couldn't afford to finance. The Ashton was 11 minutes from Reed's office. I went on a Saturday morning in February, wearing a knit cap pulled low and the oversized parka I saved for grocery runs. I'd found a key card in the inner pocket of Reed's old North Face weeks earlier, assumed it was a parking structure card for the firm. Now I understood. The card worked on the elevator. It worked on the door of Unit 1108. The apartment smelled like something expensive and floral. The walls were white. The furniture was blush pink and bone, new, deliberate, everything chosen by someone with very specific taste. On the wall beside the dining table, photographs. Reed and a young woman with long auburn hair and a wide, practiced smile. Reed laughing. Reed with his arm around her waist at a restaurant I recognized in the West Loop. Reed, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. On the coffee table, a baby name book, bristling with sticky notes in Reed's handwriting. On the kitchen counter, a letter from an OB-GYN confirming an appointment for 17 weeks gestation. The name on the letterhead was Giselle Hartley. I photographed everything. My hands were steady. I was a little surprised by that. I think somewhere between the airport curb and Pam's whiteboard, the part of me that was still hoping to be wrong had quietly stepped aside. I was in the bedroom when I heard the elevator open in the hallway outside. I had maybe 4 seconds. I moved to the closet, pulled the door almost shut, and stood very still in the dark between 2 garment bags. My heartbeat was loud enough that I was certain it would carry through the door. Giselle came in first, talking about wanting Thai food. Reed followed, his voice doing something it hadn't done with me in a long time. Warm, unhurried, indulgent. They settled into the living room with the ease of people who had done this hundreds of times. Then her voice went serious. Reed, I'm 4 months along. I need to actually know what the plan is. He sat down next to her. I could see the edge of them through the sliver of space at the closet door. He took her hand. His voice shifted into his negotiation register. Calm, measured, the one that sounds like reassurance but is actually just a slower form of pressure. I'm working on it, he said. The problem is the house. And the retirement accounts. If I hand her divorce papers right now, Illinois law splits everything 50-50. I've been restructuring. There's a property in Scottsdale I transferred into my mother's name last month, and I'm running the development division at a paper loss until this is settled. By the time it's finalized, there won't be much left to divide. Giselle made a satisfied sound. And she walks away with, she asked. Enough to cover a year somewhere cheap, Reed said. Maybe 120,000. I'll frame it as a generous gesture. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm until the pain cleared my head. 120,000. For 4 years. For every dinner party, every work trip I'd rescheduled, every budget I'd managed so carefully while he apparently maintained a separate apartment and a separate life 11 minutes from his office. I recorded every word. I left when they went to the kitchen to order food. I took the stairs all the way to the parking level. I sat in my car for several minutes before I could make myself start it. That night, I called Douglas Reeve, a lawyer Pam had used during her own divorce, known according to her for making financial misconduct very legible to judges. I played him the recording. He listened without moving. When it ended, he set his pen down and said, "Mrs. Callahan, this is a very strong position to be starting from." He told me to do nothing yet. Play the attentive wife. Keep Reed comfortable. Wait for the right public moment to move. Reed handed me the opportunity himself, 4 weeks later, when he gave me $5,000 and asked me to buy a gown for Meridian Development Group's annual charity gala at the Langham. He said the board liked to see family stability during contract renewal season. He said it while looking at his calendar, not at me, and I thought, this is what I have been to him. A line item, a prop in the presentation. I spent the $5,000 on Douglas's retainer. I wore a dress I already owned. The gala was all crystal chandeliers and $12 canopies and the kind of conversation that exists only at events where people feel obligated to discuss generosity while holding $200 glasses of wine. We're 200 room with his hand on my back. Reed walked me through the room with his hand on my back and introduced me to 4 board members in the first half hour. I smiled. I asked the right questions. I laughed at the appropriate moments. Giselle was there as a consultant, in red, spending the cocktail hour engineering reasons to stand near Reed. I watched him manage both performances simultaneously and saw the effort starting to wear on him at the seams. When the program director announced the evening's special presentation, I was already moving toward the side stage. Reed saw me. His expression shifted, just briefly, a flash of something he recovered from in under a second, and he started across the room. 2 men stepped smoothly into his path. Douglas had arranged them. I took the microphone. "Thank you so much," I said. My voice came out level, steadier than I expected. Reed has put so much of himself into building Meridian over the past several years. I thought tonight called for something that genuinely reflected where all that energy has been going. I nodded toward the AV booth. The screen behind me filled with the interior of Unit 1108, the blush walls, the photographs, the baby name book open to a page with Reed's handwriting in the margins. Then the bank statements, laid out in columns, with dates and amounts aligned beside corresponding corporate account withdrawals. Then a single summary line, 18 months, 6 figures, all of it, routed through a shell company that existed only to make a second life invisible. The room went quiet before it went loud. I heard Roberta, Reed's mother, seated at the VIP table, make a sound like something small and fragile breaking. Then the noise came all at once. Reed reached the stage steps. The 2 men held him there. He was saying things I won't repeat, and his face had gone a deep, blotchy red, and his arm was raised. I looked at him directly. This man I had believed in. This man who had driven away through the slush, without checking his mirror, and felt nothing, except the specific steadiness that comes when you realize the thing you were most afraid of has already happened, and you are still standing inside it. What followed was ugly in the way that necessary things tend to be. Reed's people claimed the documents were manipulated. Douglas released the originals, subpoenaed and certified. They claimed I had fabricated a narrative out of jealousy. Cora went on record with the Scottsdale property transfer and the Shell LLC, having documented both from the outside, for 2 years. They tried a photograph. Reed's people found a shot from a conference I'd attended in Charlotte, cropped to make a handshake with a colleague look like something else. Douglas obtained the full conference footage within 48 hours. And then the DNA results arrived. This part I had not planned. It emerged during discovery, when Giselle's prenatal records were subpoenaed as part of the financial proceedings. Douglas's team cross-referenced the fetal DNA from a standard first trimester screening with Reed's DNA sample, obtained through entirely legal means during the process. The finding was unambiguous. Reed had undergone a vasectomy in his early 30s, a fact he had never mentioned to me across 4 years of marriage. 4 years during which I had quietly wondered, and occasionally cried alone, about why it wasn't happening for us. The baby was not his. I heard through Cora that Reed had confronted Giselle in the lobby of the Ashton on a Wednesday afternoon, and that the doorman had called it the most notable 12 minutes in the building's history. That Giselle packed and left for Phoenix within the week. That Reed spent several hours alone in the empty pink apartment before driving home to a house he no longer had any claim to. I felt no pleasure about that, genuinely none. I felt the bone-deep tiredness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. The court awarded me 62% of marital assets, the Elmhurst house, and a settlement for emotional damages. The Scottsdale transfer was ruled fraudulent and reversed under Illinois statute. Reed was removed from the Meridian Board, pending a financial review. On the day the judgment was entered, Roberta was waiting in the corridor outside the courtroom. She grabbed my arm and told me I had destroyed her son, destroyed the family, and that she would never forgive me. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, and I thought about the night at O'Hare. The slush on my coat, Pam's whiteboard, 10 hash marks in a row. I told her gently that what we reap tends to resemble what we sow, and then I walked out into a cold March afternoon that smelled like thawing river water and wet concrete. And I breathed it in like it was the first clean air I'd encountered in years. I sold the house in May. I kept a third, donated a portion to a domestic shelter on the Northwest Side, and used the rest to accept my place in a graduate program in sustainable design at the University of the Arts, London. An acceptance letter that had been sitting in my inbox for 3 years because Reed had called it impractical every time I brought it up. Pam drove me to O'Hare on a muggy July morning. She cried the whole way from the parking structure to the departure's entrance. I held it together until I was through security and standing at my gate, watching the planes move slowly around the tarmac in the flat gray pre-dawn light. And then I thought, I was here. I stood right here in January, and the ground went out from under me, and I am still standing. London is gray and fast and full of people who don't over-explain themselves, and I loved it from the first week. I work hard now, in a way that feels different from the years I spent making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's version of what our life was supposed to look like. My apartment near Bloomsbury has unreliable water pressure and a radiator that clanks all night in November. Some evenings I eat toast for dinner because I forgot to get to the market. I have never once, in any of it, felt more like myself. Cora calls every few weeks. She got her portion of the estate sorted at last, and is using it to open a bakery in Logan Square, which is, I think, exactly the right use for money that should have been hers all along. Reed sent me a message 8 months after the divorce was finalized. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he was working on himself. He hoped I was well. I read it twice, closed the app, and went back to the model I was building for my thesis project. A public library for a neighborhood in South London that hadn't had one in 15 years. Small rooms with high windows. Shelves at the height a 10-year-old can reach. A reading courtyard in the back with enough plantings to make it feel, in spring, like something other than a city. Some things you put down and walk away from. Some things you pick up and carry forward. The whole work of it, I've come to understand, is knowing which is which. I chose right, in the end. And the morning I stood in front of a room of people who were listening carefully to what I had to say, for no other reason than that it was worth hearing. I finally understood what all those months of cold and exhaustion and painstaking patience had been pointing toward. Not revenge, not even justice, exactly. Just my own life, wide open and entirely mine.